Okay, I think, sorry for the delay. I'm gonna double check my share screening thing. You can see that? Okay, good, okay. Let's do participants. Record. Om Mangalam Gurudevaya Devi Matriksha Mangalam Mangalam Bhakta Vrindebhyo Sarva Lokaya Mangalam Om Stapakaya Chadharmasya Sarva Dharma Sarupini Avatara Varishtaya Ramakrishna Yati Namaha Om Sarashiva Samarambam Shankarachara Madhyamam Ashmarachara Prayandam Vande Gurum Paramparam Om Guru Brahma Guru Vishnu Guru Deva Maheshwara Guru Reva Param Brahman Dasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Om Bhadrakali Namo Nityam Saraswati Namo Namaha Veda Vedanta Vedanga Vijjastana Vevacha Sri Ganesha Sharada Guru Bhyo Namaha Hari O Shri Hari Shri Hari Jayama. Happy to continue our discussions on the Devi Gita from the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. Again, the main translation we're using is by C. Mackenzie Brown, book easily available. He's one of the leading scholars on the Devi Bhagavatam in general. It's a pretty good translation. And we're doing this very happily during this beautiful auspicious day of during the Vashant Navaratri, Chaitra Navaratri. And as per the local Panchangam, the local calendar, today is the 6th day of Navaratri. In India, by Indian date, it's the 5th day, but here it's the 6th day already. Very auspicious. And actually, this holiday of the spring Navaratri as well as the fall Navaratri will be mentioned specifically in the text eventually. There's a section, I very much like the section later on, where the Devi, Bhuvaneshwari Devi will describe all the different holy days, many holy days and many holy places to worship. And this is one of the days, one of the periods of time that's especially sacred to her worship. So we take advantage of this energy of this holy day where millions of people are worshiping her, to hear a little bit of her. And one of the ways she's worshipped is of chanting mantras and doing japa and doing puja, making sacrifices and meditating and reading. But one of the main methods is to read and contemplate sacred texts, such as the Devi Bhagavatam and the Devi Gita, Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, Devi Gita, Devi Mahatmyam, like this. So by engaging in this study, especially this time, we're engaging one of the suggested by the Devi herself methods of her worship. So we are in the first chapter of the Devi Gita, still part of the kind of setup. The Devi has not appeared yet to make her, to give her teachings, the main gist of the Devi Gita. And what has happened in the previous verses, I think we're going to start on verse 14 today. In the previous verses, a little bit of the background story of goddess Sati has given up her body due to the insult of Daksha, her father. Shiva has become very distraught and has gone into meditation, focusing on the Swarupa of Devi, the original form or the essential form of Devi, because now the incarnation of Devi as Sati is no longer available. But in the absence of the physical incarnation of the Adidevi goddess, things became very inauspicious. One of her name, the whole term, the Saubhagya, that her presence as auspiciousness, as health, as luck, as beauty, as charm, as affection, that quality when she withdrew from the world. And in that absence, other things come up, right? In the absence of auspiciousness, the definition of the absence of auspiciousness is inauspiciousness, right? So like in that power vacuum, or not even power vacuum, maybe that's not the proper term, we're using too much power politics in conception, but in that in the spiritual vacuum left by the no longer obvious presence of the Devi, a demon came up, Taraka, and he did tremendous austerity and got a boon from Lord Brahma. We mentioned this is our main discussion last week, that he asked for physical immortality. As always, Brahma says physical immortality is not possible. Ask another boon. So he thought he got physical immortality by saying, I can only be killed. The cause of my death could only be the 7-day-old legitimate son of Shiva. He thought he was safe because Shiva is not married. Sati has died. Shiva is in meditation in the Amarnath cave, been sealed by snow and ice. He's no interest to open his eyes with to speak of get married and have a child. And there's no money, there's no one to marry and have a child. So he's withdrawn. So in that absence, it said he roared in rage. He easily took over the three worlds. And the three worlds is the theme, this three-tiered universe, the Trilokyam, is going to be throughout the text, and it came in the previous last week's verses. These three worlds can be seen as the earthly realm, kind of the astral, ancestral realms of the dead, and like that, and then the heavenly realms. And in the story, especially associated with the three categories, this will come up again today, with the three categories of beings. The three realms are the three realms of beings, and these are the demonic realms, right? The underworld or other worlds of the demons, the human realms, the earth and the human realms, and the divine realms of the heavenly realms of the gods, right? So, in such a case, nobody could kill him, right? Taraka took over. He easily took over the demonic realms. He even easier took over the human realms, who were pushovers, right? And he took over even the divine realm. The gods could not kill him, and in Indra and Varuna and all the gods had to flee their own abode, right? And in great anxiety, they were wandering here and there with no home, right? And of course, we take this text also. We interpret this text a little bit also to be a story of our own spiritual life. So maybe we can have found ourselves wandering aimlessly with no spiritual home, no sense of spiritual home. So in such a situation, full of anxiety, what to do, right? So what do you do? So that's where we pick up the story. Full of anxiety, afflicted with worry. What do they do? You can wander around forever, complaining and lamenting your spiritual and physical status, right? And that's a thing to do. I'm quite fond of it personally. I do it all the time, wander around aimlessly, complaining and lamenting my condition, right? But it doesn't actually help that much. And maybe it sets us up to be able to then perhaps ask for advice. Sometimes we have to ask for, if we're in trouble, we can ask for advice. Who do we go to ask for advice? We could go to our guru. We can go to a senior person. We can go to the scriptures like the Devi Gita and the Bhagavad Gita and Gospels through Ramakrishna. Like we go to the saints, right? We can go, or we can also go to God. We can ask God, "Oh Lord, or Mother, what do I do?" Right? This is my situation. I find myself bereft of you, and the inauspiciousness that has resulted of this makes me feel without a mother and without a home. This is what the gods were feeling, right? So in this story, they go to Vishnu, and let me share the let's come. Swamiji, that the text is there. Okay. So this is where we are in Devi Gita, chapter 1, verse 14. Iti cintāturāḥ sarve jagmur-vaikuṇṭha-maṇḍale. It's easier if I'm reading from the screen is not that easy. I have to read. I'm going to read from my śaśaṃsur-harim-ekānte copāyaṃ jagāda, something like that. So what does it say? Itihi cintāturāḥ. Itihi, thus, cinta. We've seen this word. We'll see this word a lot. Cinta means worries and anxieties, right? Cinta. Cintāturāḥ. We afflicted by worries and anxieties, right? Sarve jagmur-vaikuṇṭha-maṇḍale. They all the gods that have been kicked out of heaven and wandering around aimlessly with no sense of home, right? All of them have left. They all hasten jagmuhu to Vaikuṇṭha. Where is Vaikuṇṭha? What is Vaikuṇṭha? Vaikuṇṭha is here is translated as Vishnu's heaven. The word Vishnu is not there in the original. Vaikuṇṭha-maṇḍale. Mandala is, we know that term mandala like a yantra or a circle like that as a mandala. Here it means mandala, the realm, the Vaikuṇṭha-maṇḍala, the realm or the area of Vaikuṇṭha. Okay. Taking counsel with him in private, śaśaṃsur-harim-ekānte. They went into ekānta. They met with him privately, secretly. Of course, it's not one-on-one in the story. All the gods have went headed by, all the gods have went to Vishnu and asked what to do, right? Sacha upāyaṃ jagāda, and he gave them, he instructed them that upāyaṃ, what to do. He explained to them what to do. Taking counsel with him in private, then he explained their proper recourse. So where did they go? They went to Vaikuṇṭha. So we'll just analyze some of these words to understand what's being said. Of course, it's the simple meaning. The gods went to Vaikuṇṭha, went to Vishnu's heaven, and he gave him in private, met with him privately, and he gave him instruction, right? But let's understand this a little bit, because the story we have to understand. Remember, a few weeks ago we talked about this different levels of understanding the text. There's a direct meaning, an obvious meaning, an implied meaning, and we need to know the vidhi. What is the essential meaning that we have to get from this, right? So it's not just telling. Maybe I'm misreading it completely, and commentators, as we like to do, are completely misread. It is simply a story about how the gods got kicked out of heaven and they went to Vishnu, to Vaikuṇṭha, and asked him what to do, right? A theme in the way I read text, right, is that, and I got a little bit inspired by Swami Vivekananda, by some of the fiery things he said about the nature of realization, and we should never be satisfied with reading about other people's realizations, even if either this is a ancient, even maybe not that ancient mythological story, right? Or you could say, oh, it's a fictitious story meant to teach some values or some spiritual idea. Let it be that. We can think of it this way, right? Or we could take it a little more seriously. Oh, this is in the ancient times, the gods got kicked out of heaven and went to Vishnu for advice, right? So that's, I think, better than you're thinking is just an ancient mythological story, right? Meant to maybe teach something or like this. No, this is something that happened. The gods went, but that's still, to me, is not fully satisfying. Even if we take it very literally, like the gods went to Vishnu and Vishnu gave advice, right? We have to think, what does it mean to me directly? Not just to have that knowledge, but to, does it apply to me, right? Once again, I don't want to imply understanding your own spiritual condition, but my own condition and many people in our community that we know, devotee community, we find ourselves in this position quite a bit. We can relate to it, right? It's so it may be an ancient story, it may be an ancient mythology, it may be an ancient history, even if we take it literally, right? But it's also a present day history. This is our story in some sense also. Right, one great yogini, sadhuma named Chetan Jyotima, who passed away some years ago, wonderful kirtan singer and devotee. But she used to tell us that the Bhagavatam is, she mentioned the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Vaishnava text was her favorite text. That is happening now, right? This is now, it's not just an ancient text. The stories are now. These demons are now. Externally, and we see in the world, great demons come up and killing children and like that. That's like they did in the stories. But we also have, but also internally, these internal demons come up even now, right? And so we have to take this seriously, and we go to who are the sages now, who are the gods now, who are the demons now, internally and externally. We have. This is our life also. The text also speaks to our understanding. It's not just a history of an ancient people's realization, or even of the gods' conversation with Vishnu. It's also, I can't say it should be, it is also, if we let it be, our conversation with Vishnu when we find ourselves in this situation. So we can see ourselves reflected in the story also, and so let's interpret it a little bit this way. Vaikuṇṭha is Vishnu's heaven. The different, the devas have different heavenly realms, mandales, or lokas, sometimes described as realms or worlds, like this heaven realms. And so like Shiva's highest heaven is called Kailash, right? Indra lives in Swarga, right? Brahma lives in Sattva-loka, right? And Vishnu's heaven is Vaikuṇṭha, right? Vaikuṇṭha has been interpreted to mean a couple different things. The most obvious meaning is that Vai means without, right? And Kinta, Vaikinta, if you take Kinta means covering, obstruction, ignorance, sloth. So Vaikinta is without covering, without ignorance, without sloth, right? So it's a place, a heavenly world described, but it's also it could also be understood as a state of consciousness that Vishnu lives in. It's his heaven. Hindus believe that it's not exactly a place. To say it's a place, although it can be described, some of the texts in the Puranas describe, the material realm, and above the material realm, there's different oceans, and you have to go past this ocean to different islands, and then you get to a different realm. And so it's a way of understanding it as a, if we look in the right direction, we may be able to see Vaikuṇṭha, right? But not taking it so physically, it's a spiritual realm, a spiritual state where Vishnu abides, and its qualities is being uncovered by ignorance, uncovered by actually these same ignorance, obstruction, covering, sloth is tamas, right? Uncovered by tamas, right? All these qualities are coverings of tamas. Another way to understand it is Vaikuṇṭha is also, Kunta can also mean like anxiety also. That's another secondary meaning, that without anxiety. So that's actually the idea that being a place where there's no suffering or no anxiety or no covering or no ignorance, that's a very nice way of saying heaven. And heaven is a little bit complicated in Hinduism. We have heaven in many religions, right? We have heaven as a place you go after you die if you don't go to hell, right? You go, in some religion, we have two options after death. There's either heaven or hell, or some traditions have reincarnation and other options, or different realms, right? But in Hinduism, generally speaking, many of the ideas of heaven, of Swarga, the kind of the original idea of heaven, these are places of extreme pleasure and reward. We get your reward in heaven. People say, may you have your reward in heaven. These are places of reward for extreme meritorious actions and attitudes. It's known as punya, right? And so you go to heaven and enjoy the pleasures of heaven, right, for a long period of time. And then when that extreme punya is worn out, is spent by enjoyment of heaven, one again is reborn in an earthly realm, in these earthly realms. Similarly, the hellish realms, one is a place to suffer, to reap or enjoy, to use the word enjoy very carefully, enjoy the results of sinful actions, papa, right? Where but the thing is, those actions are temporary, and therefore the suffering is also temporary, and therefore that realm, experiencing that realm or level of consciousness is temporary, right? And so Swami Vivekananda made a big emphasis. He says, never make heaven your goal, right? And that's one of he said he considered this in his discipleship lecture. He talks a lot about this as one of the prerequisites for becoming a real disciple and studying Vedanta, is that you no longer consider even heaven to be satisfying, heaven to be your goal. One's looking for something higher, right? Something looking for the eternal. What happens in the Puranic period when you have the sectarian traditions of Vaishnavism and Shaivism and Shaktism, right? The heaven realm of the supreme deity, right? Like Vishnu or Shiva or Devi or Brahma, right? Becomes not heaven, a temporary heaven for which you enjoy the fruits of your actions and then get reborn, right? Or enjoy in the body of a god, and then for as long as that, millions of years or thousands of years until that ends, right? But eternal existence with God, that is heaven. And very often that's what's meant by heaven, and by little sophisticated discussions and other religions also, even though they may have the language of punishment and reward. What they mean by heaven is not just a place of punishment, not just a place of reward, but that of the beatific presence, being in the presence of God, right? Beyond the temporary realms. So Vaikuṇṭha is that. People who go to Vaikuṇṭha believe, the belief is that you go to Vaikuṇṭha, you do not come back, because it's supreme heaven of the supreme deity Vishnu, right? And Vaikuṇṭha is described in many Puranas. Vaishnava Puranas usually describe it. It gives different pleasure gardens and different realms, and where Vishnu sits on a throne, and what he's dressed, and who his attendants are, and how they're dressed, and if you go there, how you end up with 4 arms and become a resident of Vaikuṇṭha, like this, right? And you can live eternally serving the Lord, being in the presence of the Lord. You can become his umbrella, his shoes, his servant. In anything, like, there's many beautiful ideas like this that are based on this bhakti bhav. They go here, and he's going to tell them, right, we need to worship Ma, right? So he's going to direct them not to himself, but to another, right? And that's a sectarian move in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. Srimad Devi Bhagavatam is a sectarian text also, where Devi is supreme, and it's especially fighting with maybe fight is not the right word, but it's in competition with some, or developing the ideas within the Vaishnava tradition, the Srimad Bhagavatam tradition. And so many of the stories in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other texts, it is a very common, almost trope in Hinduism, in Puranas. When there's a problem, the gods have a problem, they go to a deity. That deity says, I can't help, let's go to Vishnu. Or I can't help, let's go to Shiva. We all go to Brahma. All the gods go to Brahma. We're suffering. Brahma says, oh, what can I do? Let's go to Shiva. Shiva and Brahma together all go to at the side of the causal ocean. They pray to Lord Vishnu, and Vishnu agrees to be born. That's a common theme, right? This is that moment. Everybody goes to Vishnu, and Vishnu tells them you have to go to worship. You have to go to Devi. So there's a sectarian move. That's an important moment of this text in the development of Shaktism and of goddess worship, right? So that's important. We'll leave that as it is and admit that that's important move, and that's a recurring theme in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam in general, right? Establishing that Devi is supreme. Even Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are her servants, are her aspects, point to her, serve her, like that. So that's there. But let's look at but let's take this as like a little bit personal, right? Afflicted with worries, they journey to Vishnu's heaven. They go to Vishnu, and they go to the place that's not covered, that's not tamasic. What is Vishnu, right? Vishnu, Vishnu, the name Vishnu has been interpreted to come from a word that means all-pervading. Vishwa, we get Vishwarupa, the all-pervading. It has that idea, right? So what's all-pervading? Like consciousness. Consciousness is all-pervading. So Vishnu very often is seen in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. There's many places that can be established that Vishnu is symbolically representative of consciousness itself, right? All-pervading consciousness. Vishnu in the Chandi Devi Mahatmyam. Similarly, Vishnu from when sleeping consciousness sleeps, some demons come out of his ears. So the Chanda and Munda become, Madhu, Kaitu become the result or residue of sleeping consciousness. So there's a theme like that, right? So they go to Vishnu, which is consciousness. It could be higher consciousness. And Vishnu he's in the Trimurti idea. He's Sattva-guna. Brahma is Rajaguna, the creator. Vishnu is Sattva-guna, sustainer, and Shiva, Rudra, is Tamaguna, the destroyer. In that Trimurti, in our previous other course we're giving last week, we talked about the Trimurti and the Trishakti idea, right? The Trimurtis as a central theme of modern Hinduism, right? So he's consciousness and he's sattva. So when we find ourselves, when the gods found themselves in this struggle, when we find ourselves bereft of our home and in a lack of auspiciousness and drowned in inauspiciousness and fear, we can also go to Vishnu, right? To our own, and so that can be interpreted also. We can pray to Vishnu. We should pray to Vishnu, but also simultaneously, or it's the same thing, go within, try to find an inner answer, right? This line really struck me when I was this afternoon in our afternoon tea, the thinking about these verses. It says ekante means, so that means in solitude or in privacy or alone. And I think that's important because they meet with Vishnu privately, right? That means it's intimate. That means it's secret. That means it's private. So it could be, the way I interpret it, that listening or going into our own, inner encounter, right, with a sattvic, uncovered, unbewildered, unagitated level of our awareness, right? This is a theme throughout the Puranas, also in the Devi Mahatmyam, when Samadhi and Surata, the king and the merchant, they become bewildered. They go to a sage named Medas. Medas means subtle intelligence, right? So there may be a sage living in the forest named Medas. We can go ask him, right? And it's like I also last night I what did I do? I WhatsApped my Guruji in Allahabad, in the bank of the Ganga and near Prayag, to ask him some spiritual questions. You can go to like that, but it could also mean, and it also means going to your subtle intuition, your inner consciousness, right? Your the voice of consciousness, right? Right. Swami Ambikananda, we were discussing it, and he pointed out that in First Kings in chapter 19, there's that the still small voice, right? And it's beautiful. He read it to kind of refresh our mind, where God was passing by, right, to Elijah, and he came in wind, and it says he was not in the wind. He came in fire, and he was not in fire. He came in an earthquake, he was not in the earthquake. But he went to the mouth of the cave, and he heard a beautiful line, a still small voice, right? Right. Other translations say gentle whisper, right? And very beautiful. I mean, the story it goes in a different direction that may not be for our use, but that line is so beautiful that we can go to. God speaks sometime very subtly, and here we go in private to sattva guna, to intimate consciousness. And also remembering, because I talked to Guruji Swami Omananda last night, we were remembering. I may have mentioned this in a few other discussions, but there's a scene. Our ashram has lots of children. We house and educate many children in our ashrams. And there was a little boys, and we had brought Guruji's favorite sweet. It's called milk cake. It's particularly sweet. And we go It's expensive sweet, so we don't get it. They don't get it a lot. Actually, we always go like something special. We bought a couple kgs, some kgs of milk sweet, and then and so one of the boys, right, it was being distributed. He took milk sweet and didn't give it to the other boys. And that created a huge stir because they're being naughty and that's not the proper behavior. And they told on him, it's like Guruji, he took the milk cake and without sharing it and this type of stuff, right? Thinking that Guruji, being a strict disciplinarian, would give him a good slap or make him pull his ears or something like that. But I remember it was a very beautiful, teachable moment for the children, but a teachable moment for me too. And for us who were watching, very beautiful teaching. So he took the boy, he says, so I'm not going to punish you because I think you did something wrong. You have to think yourself, did I do something wrong? You should ask yourself. You should close your eyes and ask your own self, right? Is it better for me to eat the candy by myself, or should I offer it first to my brother disciples, right? Ask yourself, close your eyes. And the boy very sweetly, probably scared to get a slap or something, he closed his eyes, but it was very beautiful. He's like, and you see him thinking, and Guruji says, so what's the answer? He says, I think I should give it to my brothers first and then share it. Like, okay, good boy, and go. Give us a little bit of affectionate and go, right? But Guruji was telling us that in almost every case, when we're in struggle, we can ask ourselves, like, what should I do? What's the answer? Or it's like, is this right? Is this the right thing to do? And usually, if we ask ourselves quietly and honestly, the answer will come. Right, we don't really need somebody to tell us what is moral behavior, or good behavior, or spiritual behavior. We ourselves do know. I think this verse shines that idea kind of shines through. We ask properly, we get the end. We don't need anybody to answer. Of course, they go to Vishnu, but Vishnu could be also their own inner self, their inner consciousness, right? And they go to Vishnu, and Vishnu's going to tell them, we have to go to Devi, right? And so this is something also. They go to their, I use this term, and maybe it's maybe overused, they went to their higher self, right? And it is overused, and maybe it's not always good to use higher and lower and inner and outer and this type of thing, but we cannot, but we think, even neurologically, we're designed to think in metaphors, right? So the metaphor higher and lower and path like that is almost unavoidable. We can choose a different metaphor, but and not to feel bad about being low and like we haven't gotten anywhere or something like that. But the metaphor of high and low, I think, is appropriate in spiritual life. And so by going to Vishnu Vaikuṇṭha is even in the sectarian text where it's below Devi's loka, perhaps, right? It's still very high, very sublime, uncovered by ignorance. It's very sattvic. So as a place, it's the highest amongst the highest realms. As a state of consciousness, as a state of being, it's very subtle and very high. So they went very high to ask this question, right? And then the answer is to go higher, right? And so we'll see how what he says. Okay, I shall. It does not say Vishnu Vacha. We have to know by context that now it's Vishnu speaking to them. They go to him, ask a question. Now Vishnu is speaking. Let me find my verses here. Kutaś-cintāturāḥ sarve, kāma-kalpa-drumā śivā, jāgarti bhuvaneśānī maṇi-dvīpādhivāsinī. So Vishnu said, kutaś-cintāturāḥ. So in the previous verse, it says they were cintāturāḥ. They are afflicted by worry. And now Vishnu says, why? Kutaś means why. Kutaś-cintāturāḥ. Why are you suffering? Why are you afflicted by worry? Right. So this is a good question. Why are we? So the first thing, if we were to do this as take this as a way of self-reflection, I'm worried. I come to you with worry, and the first question is, why am I worried? Or why are you worried? Why am I worried? Right? Why are you also worried? sarve kāma-kalpa-drumā śivā, right? Kāma-kalpa-drumā. There is a wish-fulfilling tree, right? Why are you worried? There is the Divine Mother. Here could it be called, she's called Śivā. You know, word Shiva, this is Śivā, who's the kāma-kalpa-drumā. Kama means desire, kalpa means wish, right? And druma means tree or creeper. So they also called the kalpa-vriksha. Sometimes we call it kalpa-vriksha, the wish-fulfilling tree. Here called kāma-kalpa-drumā, the tree that fulfills all of our desires. So let's understand who is this tree. It's referring, this is a quality of Śivā, of Devi, right? Śivā means auspicious, right? Śivā means good, auspicious, benevolent, right? So Shiva, the Lord Shiva is this. And what's their problem? They've lost Sati. Sati, and now Shiva has Shiva has no wife, right? And therefore no child, and therefore they're suffering, right? So this is a play on words. And in the commentary in our textbook, it mentions correctly that Shiva doesn't always mean, one of the definitions of Shiva is the wife of Shiva, right? We say, but in many of these Shakta texts, it does not mean the wife of Shiva. It means the quality that we attribute to Shiva, that's Devi's quality. She's goodness, she's benevolence, she's auspiciousness, right? She is this loving kindness like this, right? But anyway, we have the Shiva Datri, the giver of auspicious. Anyway, so but I think it's playing on the term, because don't you know Shiva exists now. The wife of Shiva, they're waiting for their prayer is they need Shiva to get married. Shiva needs a wife so that they can have a son that in 7 days will kill Tarakasura and get their home back, right? So I think it's plain. Don't you know, even now, Shiva's wife exists, right? But it's not Shiva's wife. There's a name that very consciously also means Shiva. Shiva exists. I do it all the time. Between an and ah is a big difference. Shiva exists now. Why are you worried? There is right now the wish-fulfilling tree, Shiva, right? The goddess, the divine mother, the auspicious one, right, exists right now, and she is the wish-fulfilling tree. So that this wish-fulfilling tree, kalpa-vriksha, sometimes a wish-fulfilling gem, sometimes it's described as a wish-fulfilling cow, right? These are all in the same category. There's something having which all one's desires become satisfied. And it's believed that in Indraloka there is such a tree. That tree gets stolen. I mean, the whole story is about what happens to the wish-fulfilling cow or the wish-fulfilling tree, right? It's one of the. But here it's reference to one of the qualities of the wish-fulfilling tree is you have to be underneath it. If you're underneath the tree, the wish-fulfilling tree, then your desires are fulfilled, right? So the fact is, our desires are not fulfilled, right? Even though right now there's a tree that fulfills all our desires. And yet here we are, not you, me, without my desire, feeling frustrated without our desires fulfilled. Right, our worldly desires, or spiritual desires, or our existential desires fulfilled. Yet there's a tree that fulfills all desires, and here we are not fulfilled. Right? What does that mean? We're not underneath that tree. We're not. So maybe we're not even near the tree. Right? But we are near the tree. The tree, we'll find out, is right here. She's right here. Right? She's not. She's somewhere else, and she's right here. Right? And the tree's right here. But we still have to consciously be underneath it. And so that means we have to get underneath it. Right? It may not be that easy. If it goes that easy, we have all the desires fulfilled, right? And we don't. So it must not be that easy, right? That means there must be some qualification, some maybe purification. To use this example of being under, to get close to the tree and be under the tree and have all the desires fulfilled, may mean to get close to God, to be under God, so intimate, so in union with God that we become complete. Maybe our desires are fulfilled, or we become completely satisfied, even beyond the realm of desires, right? So to say we need to go to the auspicious goddess, the wish fulfilling tree, is also says that we need to do, could be interpreted as we need to do sadhana. And it is interpreted this way because we won't get there today, but 5 verses later, their response is to start sadhana, right? Vishnu says we have to perpetuate this wish fulfilling tree, and their immediate response is to sadhana, right? So I'm not giving an inappropriate interpretation of the verse. It's the 5 verses later, it says just that, what they do, right? So there is in all auspicious, the Śivā, the wife of Shiva does exist, not as Shiva's wife yet. She exists. Actually, we'll see. She says in the next half line, bhuvaneśānī. Bhuvaneśānī is another form of Bhuvaneshwari, a similar meaning, right? Let me see. Means so Bhuvaneshwari. Bhuvaneśwari, or this version of this, and is she's the supreme goddess as per the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, and she's the one that's going to be speaking the Devi Gita. So we have to get to know her, right? And it means Bhuvana means the universe. It means the earth. It means the atmosphere. Could have different type of meanings like this, but generally it's taken to be the universe. And Ishwari is goddess or ruler or queen or empress, Bhuvaneshwari. So she's the empress goddess of the world, right? And it's definitely feminine, right? You can say Bhuvaneshwara. There's a form of Shiva called Bhuvaneshwara in a place in where he's worshipped in Orissa, Bhuvaneshwara, right? So this is Bhuvaneshwari. She is one of the Dashmahavidyas. We mentioned the 10 goddesses, this tantric collection of goddesses: Kali, Tada, Soroshi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamasta, Dhumavati, Bagalamukhi, Matangi, and Kamala, right? So she's one of these 10 goddesses also, the Dashmahavidyas, right? And we'll get to know her. We'll get to see her appearance, her personality, her mantras will be revealed in as the text goes on. So why they go to Vishnu? Because they're full of worry. They're cintāturāḥ, and Vishnu's first question is, why are you cintāturāḥ? Why are you worried? When right now the all auspicious Śivā, who's a wisher, who can satisfy all of our desires, right, exists right now. Where is she? She's dwelling right now in the maṇi-dvīpa. Jāgarti bhuvaneśānī maṇi-dvīpādhivāsinī. She is dwelling Adivāsinī in the maṇi-dvīpa, the jeweled island. What is maṇi-dvīpa? So we'll take it just like we did with Vaikuṇṭha, first at the rhetorical level of the Devi Bhagavatam, which is the sectarian perspective that's developing Shaktism and the Shaktic idea. So if Vaikuṇṭha, usually considered in Vaishnava tradition to be the highest or one of the highest realms, now the Lord of Vaikuṇṭha is saying we need to go right now, and even a higher realm. There's Bhuvaneshwari is living in this maṇi-dvīpa. So maṇi-dvīpa is her heaven realm, her eternal realm, her mandala, right? Mandale. There's a Vaikuṇṭha mandala. This is maṇi-dvīpa, and it's maṇi-dvīpa means maṇi means island, dvīpa means island. Maṇi means gems or jewels, and dvīpa means island. Adivāsinī, she is the original dweller of the. Vasini means to dwell. Adivāsinī, she's the original dweller of this realm. So in the 12th canto, the 12th skanda of Devi, actually pretty much the last, not the last, I don't know how the chapters are designed. I love this section. It's unfortunately, that Menon retelling of the Devi Bhagavatam we mentioned in our first discussion leaves this chapter out, right? Which is very disappointing because I really would love a cleaned up, nice telling of descriptions of the maṇi-dvīpa, but it's beautifully described in the last section, the last chapter almost, or group of chapters, and the whole text ends with a description of maṇi-dvīpa. So in chapter 10 of the 12th book, verse 3 to 4, I think we shall read the translation. So it gives you a definition of the maṇi-dvīpa. But this is this kind of that sectarian perspective, establishing Devi as supreme. In the very beginning, the maṇi-dvīpa, the Devi Mula Pakriti Bhagavati. So this is her name. Devi, the goddess, Mula Pakriti, the original foundational energy, the foundational matter, right? Bhagavati, the supreme goddess. Like we know Bhagavan, here Bhagavati, right? Built this place. She built maṇi-dvīpa, right, for her own residence, right? So she, by her will, she created trillions of universes, which are sidelong glances, but she created for herself this heaven world, right? And it says superior to Kailash. That means above Shiva's realm, which is showing that Shakti in this text is higher than Shiva. Superior to Vaikuṇṭha, which is Vishnu's realm, superior to Goloka, which is Krishna's realm. This is a direct references to the Srimad Bhagavatam, which presents another realm above Vaikuṇṭha as Gokul, the realm of Krishna, very intimate like that. It says, verily no other place in this universe can stand before it, right? Hence it is called maṇi-dvīpa or Sarvaloka. Sarvaloka means the all look, the greatest, or of all, the all loka, the all realm, as it is superior to Sarvaloka, to all realms, right? So that's a great statement that the Devi's realm, she created it. It's by very definition, its name maṇi-dvīpa means Sarvaloka, which means higher than all the lokas. Which ones do I mean? I mean Vaikuṇṭha, Gokula, and Kailash, right? So there is that. Remember, this is a true Shakta Purana, right? But let's take these. We took Vaikuṇṭha a little bit esoterically. We can take this verse also esoterically. What is this maṇi-dvīpa? So this jeweled island, as described in that 10th book, right, is beautifully described. It describes all the enclosures and the different oceans in between, and then the walls, and how many yojanas and miles long and high, what they're made from. Each enclosure, one is made of ruby and everything, and then all the different deities and goddesses with their retinue and their weapons and their houses, and the type of rivers and fruits and trees and plants that grow there. And then the next level it's describing all enclosure after enclosure. It's describing a yantra, right? And it's describing in its own way the Sri Yantra, as understood in the Bhuvaneshwari worship tradition. So it's also a heavenly world description of the yantra, the Sri Yantra of Devi, from the Bhuvaneshwari tradition. That Sri Yantra is also understood in the Sri Vidya tradition. One of our readings for our other course is on the Sri Vidya tradition, briefly mentioned, is also it's description. The Sri Yantra is a description of the universe. It's also a description of the individual, right? This body is also a Sri Yantra, right? And the different enclosures that can be seen two-dimensionally, three-dimensionally as a meru, it can also be seen and also have been seen and identified by the tantric writers and commentators as different chakras. So the maṇi-dvīpa itself is the body, right? The jeweled kingdom or queendom, right? The heaven world of the goddess. She may have a heaven world above Vaikuṇṭha, Brahmaloka, Gokul, and Kailash, right? But where is that? That also simultaneously is in our own body, right? In the one of the main traditions of Sri Vidya worship, there's different ways of worshiping Sri Vidya, and one of them that's associated most with Advaita Vedanta worships the Sri Yantra exclusively at the top of the head. We don't worship her as the chakras of the body. The yantra is visualized top of the head. That's another way of saying this body is her realm. That's very powerful, right? But also, let's get more esoteric. Let's get more refined, because she created the highest heaven, which means the highest realm. She's the yantra that also exists. Our body's a yantra, it's worldly yantra, but the yantra is above us, above our head. Remember, the gods went to Vaikuṇṭha, the highest place, and he tells them to go higher, right? To go higher and higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of awareness, right? So where is she? She's right here. She's above us. She's in the highest heaven, right? She's above us, above our head. She's within us as our innermost consciousness, right? Within this body, right? But also her name, she's the ruler of the universe. She's the ruler of the universe, big universe, trillions of universes, the 3 worlds, the 118 worlds and trillions of universes, Brahmandas they call them, right? But she's also the ruler of our universe. Our universe, not only our galaxy and universe, our universe means our world, our world of experience, right? Our body, our family, our home, our country, as far as our consciousness and our world expands, right? So she's the ruler of the universe. She's dwelling right. She's the wish-fulfilling gem, wish-fulfilling tree, fulfill all our desires. And she's right. Where is she? She's above us, supremely above us. She's right above us, and she's within us. She's everywhere. This whole world is her yantra. She's sitting in the center of the yantra. The bindu of the yantra is our sushumna. The bindu of the yantra is the top of the head. The bindu of the yantra is in every single particle of the universe. The bindu is everywhere, right? So she's all those things, right? So she is everywhere. So she's Shiva. She's that auspicious goddess. They're praying. What do they want? They need Shiva to get a wife. The wife of Shiva is already here. She hasn't taken birth yet. They have to pray for that, and they will, right? But she's here now. She's here, which is so interesting, because why are they lamenting? Why did they lose their power? Why did Tadaka come up? Why everything became auspicious? Because why did Sabhaugya leave them? Why did auspicious and luck and fortune and leave them? Because Ma was gone. And so the first thing when they actually asked their higher consciousness or asked Lord Vishnu how to fix it, the first thing he says, she's not gone. Right? This is actually very profound. Right? Their problem, why? He says, why kutaś-cintāturāḥ? Why are you worried? Why are you suffering from the worry? We can answer answers quickly. Ma's gone. And his response is, why are you worried when Ma's not gone? This is the answer, right? Ma's actually not gone, right? She's right here. She exists. She's existing now, right? And she's a universal mother. She fulfills all our desires. And we have to ask ourselves, what are our desires, right? We have so many desires, but we have our real desires, right? Very unique. The theme of this text is going to be ultimately, well, we have desires and we're born karma, artha, moksha, these different desires are there, but our real desire is her, right? And we'll see that longing for her is very important. You'll see in one important Srividya devotional text called the Saundarya Lahari, attributed to Adi Shankara. There's a beautiful mantra, sloka, that this describes other gods and goddesses, right? He's praying with their hand gestures, are giving fearlessness and granting boons, right? They're telling, they do this. This is called Vara Mudra, giving boons, blessings, right? And you'll see in pictures of Devi, I have a paint, here's a drawing of her, right? This is not, but many, especially Lalita and other gods, even Ma has, Kali is often seen with her lower right hand this way, right? He says, they're giving boons, fulfilling our desires. He says, but you, mother, don't do this. So when you read that verse, it's like, what does it mean you don't do this? Lalita gives, her hands are doing this. This is Bada Mudra. It says, no, actually, you are pointing with your hand towards your feet. right? You're pointing, you're not giving blessings, you're pointing your hands towards your feet. Really what we want. We don't want anything else. We think we do. And we keep going to gods and goddesses asking for blessings. They keep giving us blessings and we're never satisfied. You see, we have desire, we work really hard, we fulfill desires, and desire is temporary. It's not as good as we thought. It inflames more desire. I mean, all the faults of satisfying desires, as wonderful that could be, are still there. They're temporary and they're difficult to get. And usually it doesn't happen, and minimally they're temporary, right? So going to gods, praying for fulfilling desires is not intelligent, right? So you, O mother, it says, are showing these gestures, saying, pointing to your feet, really worship my feet. This is what you want. Don't worry about other desires. This is our real desire, is my feet. You want me. Right, very beautiful. So I'm giving a little bit away of the story, but as we're not going that fast with these verses, so it may take us a while to get to them, so I don't feel too bad. When the gods perform austerities and Ma appears to them and asks, "What do you want?" They're like, "Well, well, we have you. What do we want? No. You did some austerity. What do you want?" It's like, oh yeah, we came with some desire. We desire that you'd be born, take birth and marry Shiva, so that this demon, this bothersome demon, but we have you now, right? He says, no, it's still that original desire has to be fulfilled. That's why you did the austerity, and I'll be born as Parvati, fulfill your desire. So, but then they ask, no, wait. Okay, that's good. You want to fulfill that desire? That's fine. That's an important desire, and we're happy seeing you. But you're going to disappear in a second, right? And she does. She in fact disappears in the side of the gods, right? How do we have you all the time, right? This is better than we imagined, seeing you and talking to you. But then that's she speaks to Devi Bhagavatam, the Devi Gita, these teachings on sadhanas to have her realization, her union, her identity, her devotion to her continuously. Right, not coming and going. Even our visionary Kundalini type of experiences are temporary, right? What to speak of other desires. So what we really want. Vishnu says, why are you so worried? For the auspicious goddess is a wish-fulfilling tree, dwelling in the jeweled island as ruler of the universe, dwelling in maṇi-dvīpādhivāsinī as Bhuvaneshwari or Bhuvaneśānī. She is, and then, I forgot this very last. She is ever attentive. Jāgarti, she's awake. I like this is very like she's extremely conscious of us, right? It's not like we have to get her attention. She's very awake. She's very attentive. She is pure consciousness, right? She's fully awake conscious, maybe our fully awake consciousness, right? So we take it that way, but she is ever awake. If we call to her, the response is instantaneous, right? She's very awake, right? Jagarti. It's already 8:05. Let me look. What do you think, Swamiji? Should I jump into the next verse?
Well, it's up to you.
Okay. I think the next two verses are together. We'll split them. We'll introduce them a little bit, and then let what we thought kind of stew, and next we can dive into it because it's really interesting. Next verse 16. Asma kam manyad eva tad upekashat. No, my eyes, let me make it bigger. Sorry. Upekashat. Astina anyata. Shiksha eva yam sorry. Shiksha eva yam jagan matra krita asmat shikshanaya cha. Something like that. I really messed that one up. Sorry. Let's pull it apart. Asma akamyanat. Akamanayat. There it is. Right. Evatat. Okay. She is upeksha. Upeksha means negligent. She seems to be ignoring us. Right. Now hear the word neglect. She neglects us. Right. Right. Why? Right. It's because of our misbehavior. This is a kamanayat, our misdeeds, our bad behavior, our mistakes. Right. She neglects us only because of our mistakes. Shiksha eva iyam. Shiksha eva iyam. She does this only to teach us. Right. She seems to be. The last thing I said is jagarti. She's awake. She's conscious of us, and yet we're not getting a response. Right. That means not that she's not paying attention to us, not that she's ignoring us, not that she's rejected us. Right. Not she's punishing us. She's doing it. She's punishing us. She seems to be. She's chastising us. Right. But only not because she's not conscious of us. She seems to be not conscious of us because for teaching us, to teach us something. Such chastisements by Jaganmata, Matra, the world mother, this mother of the world, is simply for our instruction. Shikshanaya cha. So even she is, how to say, such chastisements, even the word shiksha is twice in this verse, right? Shiksha eva iyam, that she's instructing us. Why is she instructing us? For our instruction. At the end of the verse, it says shikshanaya cha, for our instruction. She is instructing us for our instruction. He's translated, she's chastising us for our instruction. She's chastising us. But even the word for chastisement here is instructing us. Right. So it's a way of saying punishing. When I punish you, to teach you, we use this term in language, I'll teach you a lesson. Right? To teach you something. So it's kind of that idea. Even this idea that she seems to be punishing us, right? In the verse in the half line above, by seeming to neglect us, seeming to not be present, seeming to ignore us, right? It's being done only to teach us something. So Vishnu asked in the previous verse, right? Why are you suffering when Ma exists? Right? Isn't that basically what you're saying? Why are you suffering? The world mother, Śivā, wish-fulfilling tree, exists right now as Bhuvaneshwari, controller of the entire universe in the maṇi-dvīpādhivāsinī, in the jeweled island, right? So Vishnu asks, why are you suffering when Ma exists? We can also ask, right? And I do ask, why am I suffering when Ma exists? Right? Right. This is the reverse of the same question, right? Vishnu asks, why are you suffering when Ma's here? But we can ask in two ways. Both, we can ask ourselves, why am I suffering when Ma exists? Vishnu's right. But you can also ask it a little bit sarcastically, right? Or philosophically, theologically, why am I suffering when God exists? And this brings us to a big problem in religion, especially in Western forms of monotheism, right? When God exists and God's all loving and all powerful and all everything, right? Why am I suffering? Why is it, an even bigger question, why is there suffering? What to speak of me suffering when God exists, right? And so this is a very, this verse, these two verses, 16 and 17, are a very light touch of dealing with the problem of suffering. Vishnu is going to describe in just a few verses why we're suffering, right? In theology and more specifically in the philosophy of religion, and eventually we want to give a course on philosophy of religion as our second year kind of advanced courses. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. And it's a topic almost nobody likes to talk about. So I'm hoping I'm going to convince everybody to talk about these things because I love this stuff, right? There's a problem, they call it the problem of evil. And here evil means not just like ontological evil, the horrible, cruel, but also just suffering. Evil here means suffering, evil and suffering, we could say, right? And the problem comes up is that how do we reconcile the existence of evil and suffering with an omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient God? God is all powerful, can do whatever she wants or he wants. God's all-knowing, knows everything, including that we're suffering, right? And is omnibenevolent, right? All good, right? And so the question sometimes, it is a major problem for many people. Usually, it's an argument that's used by a critical position against religion, against the monotheistic, what they call the moral monotheistic idea of the deity, is that the existence of evil disproves or weakens the possibility of the God that many people present as exists. Because one of the things, three of the things we say about the monotheistic, the moral monotheistic, ethical monotheistic God is that he usually, or he, she, or it, well, in most monotheistic tradition will say he is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Right, all good, all loving, all good, all powerful, and all knowing. Yet, God, suffering and evil exists, right? And so either he knows about it, right, but has chosen not to, and can do something about it, but chosen not to do something, chosen not to do anything about it. That means that she's not omnibenevolent, not all loving, right? Oh no, he wants to fix it, right? If he knew about it, he could fix anything, and he'd want to fix anything, but he doesn't know about it, then he's not all-knowing. He knows about it, wants to fix it, but can't, then he's not all-powerful. This is a logical trilemma, right? The three cannot exist in the presence of the force hypothesis, or the force premise of evil and suffering existence. This is a challenge that's given, right? And the term, this is, maybe we shouldn't have started, but the term for this religion's response to this is called theodicy, right? Theodicy is a term coined in 1710 by Leibniz, right? He has a book by that title, and he gives a very far out version of reason why an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing God can allow a world where there's such suffering. It's not just a little suffering. We're seeing the news, there's tremendous suffering, tremendous and horrendous suffering. So it's not just like, if God exists, why are there weeds in my garden or something like that? If God exists, why are children molested? If God exists, why is there war? If God exists, it could be that type of response. It's a good challenge, because it may not actually challenge God's existence. It challenges this definition of God as omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient, right? And so what theodicy does is try to provide a plausible justification, a morally or philosophically sufficient reason for the existence of evil and the existence of this God, of these three divine qualities, right? So I love theodicy. I think it's fascinating, because it really we always think, oh, we have to justify our behavior in front of God, right? But theodicy tries to figure out how to justify God's behavior to us, give an explanation to humans why God would do such a thing, or is doing such a thing like this. So, and there's been many. Leibniz himself used a best possible worlds. That out of all possible worlds, this one's horrible, but it's the best possible one, because every other possible, since God's omniscient, he knows every possible world that he could create, and he created the best possible one. So there's other worlds that would have less suffering or more suffering, but it'd be a worse world. So that's one argument. This is a one sentence. This could be a whole. He wrote a whole book on it. So coining the term theodicy, right? And there's many other. Augustine has an argument. The ones that I'm most impressed with as a Christian in the realm of Christian theology, because really this is an argument based upon the Christian definition of the deity, primarily Christian definition of the deity. John Hick, he's a very famous theologian, one of my favorites in school. And he was especially important in he's important for two things: for developing a pluralistic hypothesis for religion and how many religions could be true simultaneously in some sense, right? And the other thing he's very famous for is for his theodicy, which he called a soul-making theodicy, right? And and basically, in a very simple way, is that evil or suffering exists so that humans can develop their souls. They develop and become real people, real living beings, right? Good, moral people. And that requires struggle, that requires the presence of evil, right? And when we hear that, I can right offhand, I can come up with arguments to challenge him, right? But he I think very successfully in many ways go through rephrasing every opponent's position and tries to show that a good God would make such a world, because morally mature beings are a good thing to do, for a good God to do. And the simple example he gives is like we don't want our children to suffer, right? But we know they know they have to suffer a little bit. Like nobody wants their kid when they get it to have their heart broken, right? You're like, but they have to have their heart broken, right? Although they won't grow up. That's part of, I don't want your children, I don't want your children not to have their heart broken, right? But you know what I mean? There's a thing that a loving parent doesn't want their kid to suffer, but knows the kid has to suffer. But then the question is, why so much suffering? And there's all kinds of philosophical, ethical reasons that could be challenged, right? Ayan Maharaj, Swami Bhajanananda, a monk of the Ramakrishna order, that's philosophically writing very intelligently new research and writing on Sri Ramakrishna's teachings and life. He uses a term based upon Hick's idea, calls it a saint-making theodicy, right? And I think this is a little bit closer to what these verses are about. It's not about general suffering in the world, but about specific suffering of the sadhak, because these aren't general people who are suffering, right, in this particular question. He's not asking, what I was asking to myself is, who's the R in this sentence? She neglects us now because of our misbehavior. Whose misbehavior? Not the misbehavior of the world, not the behavior of cancer patients, not the cancer behavior of war victims, right? This verse is not about these type of issues. These verses are about whose are the group of gods that have went to Vaikuṇṭha and asking Vishnu, that have lost Shakti, right? So this is about, and we interpret this is about sadhakas, right? Why, and what's the suffering specifically? I'm longing for God, and I can't find God. God has disappeared and is ignoring me, right? You can take it. Let's pull it down to these levels, right? So this is a different level. So this is more the soul-making theodicy, that God is doing things, and we're experiencing things so that we can be purified, that we can search in a proper place, that we personally, spiritually can mature and have become saints, become realized beings, right? Right, and so there's a point that I was thinking this morning that we're in our discussion on these verses. The question, in the big question and small question, is how can an omnibenevolent deity, fill in the blank, create allow a world so much suffering, or how can an omnibenevolent deity cause me suffering, be not present before me? Let's take it at that sadhana level, right? We have to remember she's not omnibenevolent in the argument that the problem of evil poses is to the Christian definition of the deity, right? It doesn't quite work with the goddess, and because she is not such a deity. She is omnibenevolent. She's the most benevolent, right? She's also the most horrendous. She is a great Mahadevi, Mahasuri. She's a great god and the great demon, right? Demoness and the great demon. She's everything, right? She, as Kali, she's the world of birth and death, of sickness and health, of war and peace, success and failure, right? She's the full spectrum, right? But she is not just omnibenevolent, she's omni-malevolent, right? She's omni, She's everything. She's the all. And she's Shiva, describing her in the previous verse as good. She's not just good as opposed to bad. She's not just good as in pleasure as opposed to suffering, or success as opposed to failure, or as health as opposed to sickness, right? She's good. She's the good that manifests the world of duality, which includes birth, death, sickness, health, in the full spectrum, right? She's the good behind good and bad. You know, she's goodness itself. She's isness itself. She's the omni in all these terms, right? I think that's very important. So I think I don't want to get. One of the last things we were discussing over our afternoon tea, Swamiji brought up, and we'll end with this before moving on to the next verse. We'll start the next verse next week. This very beautiful story from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, right? If you want to look it up, it's in book 5, chapter 2, right? And I'll quickly tell the story. It's a charming story. The gods, the demons, and humans. Remember the three-tiered universe, right? All go to Prajapati, the progenitor, maybe Brahma or something like that. Actually, if I'm remembering properly, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Prajapati is also a name for the Brahman, as well as the Brahma. It's like the original source of everything, like this, right? And so they ask for spiritual advice, and the Prajapati says, da, 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 right? And this is especially meaningful to me because the last time I got to see one of our great spiritual teachers and gurus, His Holiness Swami Chidananda, was in Maryland. We went for a retreat just before the last time he was in public, and the retreat was held at the Ramada Inn, one of these type of, it was not a very expensive place that they could afford to get, but the word Ramada, he gave a whole lecture on the title of he said, I drove up and saw the title of so Rama, of course, and then Da, he gave a whole lecture based upon this verse of da, da, da. And so the demons, the gods went to Brahma, and what's the teaching? Says da, and then and Prajapati says, have you understood? Right, and the god said, yes, I've understood. What have you understood? And he says, da means damyata, stands for damyata. Damyata means self-control, right? Self-control. And then Prajapati says, yes, you have understood. Go. Then the Manusyas, the humans, they went to Prajapati, and he says, da. And then Prajapati says, have you understood? And Prajapati says, yeah. And the humans say, yes, we've understood. What have you understood? Da means datta. Datta means to give, to be generous, charitable, generous. Yes, you've understood. Go. Then the demons, the asuras, they also came to Prajapati and says, give us a teaching. Da. What have you understood? And the demon says, yes, we understood. The teaching da means daya dvam. Daya dvam means to be compassionate. Yes, you've understood. Go. This teaching is very the same word, da. Same sound, not even word, da. Each one understood according to their level of awareness and their level of need, appropriate to where they were on their spiritual evolution, right? And the asuras at the lowest realm, if to think of this as a three-tiered universe, right? The asuras is the lowest realm. They're by nature very cruel and very selfish, right? And therefore, their discipline for spiritual life is to become compassionate, right? Daya dvam, right? So that's the teaching for them. They need to become compassionate. The humans are by nature selfish and self-centered. They need to become generous, and we are very dependent on each other more than most species, right? We need to become their fault. To overcome that fault, their fault, they need to become generous and give and sharing and charitable, right? The devas is a different realm, right? Compassionate and generous. This is about interacting with others, right? And for most of, we have, this has been interpreted this way also, we have the instructions is for all of us. We need to become the asura parts of us, the cruel parts of us need to become compassionate. That's our discipline, right? Towards others. We need to change the way we speak and act and behave towards others, right? We become nonviolent and overcome these things, right? The human aspect, the selfish, self-centered aspect needs to become generous. We can overcome that by generosity. So that's a sadhana. It's also both of these for the humans and the suras are how we treat others. The instruction for the devas is different. They need to become self-controlled, right? It means self-disciplined, right? And so it's not about, it's not, oh, this is a different, a triple, not a double standard or triple standard, right? It's not about others. They're all selfish. No, this is different. These can be understood as three aspects of the same person, not three different categories of beings. We have the different aspects. Our divine aspects, right? This is where sadhana starts. These other compassion and generosity, these are bare minimum human behaviors, right? We say if somebody is not compassionate, not generous, like they're not even human beings, right? With the speaker, but spiritual discipline starts above the human level. My Guruji used to start a poem. He says, Swami Vishnuvananda Maharaj, he says, rise from animality, cross the realm of humanity. Taste immortality and dance and almost feel felicity, something like this, right? But rise from animality and cross the realm of humanity. Even though our human nature is not sufficient, we have to go above our human nature to our divine nature. That requires, then the discipline becomes sadhana. So this verse, she neglects us. The suffering is not general suffering of war, disease, and what's hurricanes and acts of, we even call it acts of God, right? So if God's all compassionate, why is he sending an earthquake? You know, these are acts of God, these big things like that. This is about the suffering that we experience as sadhakas. So the answer is going to be for the sadhaka, not general. Of course, it can be tangent. If everybody goes to God, it would be a better world, and that's fine, right? But these texts have to be, it's being set up for, and the response of this is they're going to go into the Himalayas and do austerity. They're going to control their mind. They're going to do damyata, right? What are they going to focus on? Maṇi-dvīpādhivāsinī, the goddess who dwells within. They're going to call her by name. They're going to do pujas to her. They're going to chant her stotrams. They're going to do yagyas. They're going to fast, observe her festivals, do nyasa, all these different sadhanas that are part of tantric and devotional practice, right? Right. To end what suffering? Not just general suffering. The real suffering, the real cause of anxiety, their lack of awareness, direct, personal, dynamic awareness of the Divine Mother, right? That's and so we would hold, and this is, I believe this is true, as these verses are being said. I personally, I tell you, reveal my mind, these verses are some of my favorite verses of any scripture anywhere, right? These 4 or 5 verses before we get to the next section, right? This section defining what our problem is, what the Ma's right here. She's only doing this so that to teach us how. She's only doing this to teach us how we're suffering. Let me. Okay, well, maybe this is a good way to do it. We'll end. Rephrase this verse. These verses, right? Why Vishnu asks, "Why are we suffering?" And he says, "She is neglecting us or punishing us." Right? Why are we suffering? Because she's punishing us. Right? Why is she punishing us? Why is she neglecting us or punishing us? Because of our misdeeds. What are our misdeeds? What causes our misdeeds? We're neglecting her. Right? So let's make, if A becomes B and B becomes C and C becomes D and D becomes E, that means A is E. Right? So what is A is E? We're suffering. Seemingly she's neglecting us we're suffering because we're neglecting her. She's ever awake. She's right here. She's the wish-fulfilling tree. We don't see her. This is our problem, right? We're not awake. We're not conscious of her, right? So this whole experience, and this can be taken quite powerfully psychologically. Many spiritual aspirants at a certain level of their spiritual life, some by temperament have a balanced personality and they're grounded and they can digest all this and maturely go through it. But for many of us, it's hell, it's torture, right? The suffering is real, the dark nights of the soul, the agony and sometimes it's just external causes that cause our agony, but sometimes the cause is foundational. It's like it's spiritually foundational. That what Saint Augustine wrote in the Confessions: our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Right. That is a rephrasing from a different tradition of, I think, these verses. So Vishnu is asking, why are you restless? Why are you suffering? They're restless until they rest in her. And so the next verses will instruct us how to focus on her, how to go to her, how to surrender to her. And so we'll leave it at that. I went over, but that's what I always do. Maybe we'll just say that's an hour and a half class rather than an hour class and stop lying to you every single week. It's not good to lie to the devotees every single week. Jai Ma, Jai Sri Guru Maharaj Ji ki Jai, Jai Mahamai ki Jai, Jai Swamiji Maharaj Ji ki Jai, Jai Bhuvaneshwari Devi ki Jai, Jai Ma Bhavatarini Dakshineshwari Dakshinakali ki Jai. Hari Om Tat Sat. Let me get out of this mode. Any questions or comments?
Elijah's mom
yes.
has a comment.
Yes. Sure. Where is it? Oh, there you are. Okay, I see you. Yes.
So I was thinking about some of the, a lot of the different dynamics of what you were talking about. And in Job, in scripture, it talks about, shall we accept good from God and not evil?
Yeah.
And in the story of Job, it was pretty evident that Satan was on a leash.
Yeah.
And any suffering that he encountered was ultimately for God's glory. And and it's interesting because you see that kind of come out in, so you have the Old Testament scripture and then you have New Testament scripture. And one other thing that Job had said was, God has given and God has taken away, blessed be the name. So it's like, the Lord has given, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord.
Yeah.
And in that, Lord there's a difference between the capital L, lowercase O-R-D, and then the all caps L-O-R-D. And the all caps L-O-R-D is ultimately coming back to Yahweh. And when you look at that, it's the name of the Lord when God is actively present in our current circumstances.
Yeah.
Which is pretty powerful to lean in, and rather than look at like suffering as if it's something that's outside of us, rather than something that is allowed and in some sense God ordained to accomplish a specific purpose. And part of what was where that was allowed was, it was literally, you see this kind of, I don't want to say cosmic, but this conversation of like, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him in all the world, faithful in all his ways. And so sometimes our sufferings, I believe, are entrusted to us and meant to not only refine our character, but be used in service of others and ultimately to bring glory to God, as we're refined. And it's interesting because then when you come into the New Testament, you see Paul encounter different kinds of sufferings, which I know you talked about, like the difference between, there's different kinds of suffering. You could go through daily struggles, but then you could go through suffering that would be, some of it is specific. There could be suffering that's specific to challenges in your earthly life. And then there's also suffering specifically because you're following maybe a path of faith that's met with resistance. And so Paul goes through and talks about all these things that they've encountered, being shipwrecked with this, that, all the different types of suffering that he was encountering. But one of the things that he talks back to is he talks about how, you know, when people say like, God won't give you more than you can handle, I always say I completely disagree with that.
Yeah.
And the reason why is that sometimes I believe that God will give us more than we can handle. So we will lean in for the strength that is beyond ourselves. Yeah. And it without suffering, sometimes we don't look beyond our own pride and our own ego. And when you're entrusted with suffering, it really is. I mean, if you think of all the times that you've gone through hard things, how, you know, right behind that, there's going to be somebody that you're able to serve out of your suffering, you know, relating in compassion, you know, not having a great high priest who can't understand what it's like, but someone who's been through it, you know, and able to comfort with the comfort they're comforted with, you know. And so you know, Paul boasts about, he talks about how I'm not going to boast in like my strengths, but rather my weaknesses, for when I'm weak, then I'm strong, because having to lean into God for strength that he didn't have within himself was really, that was the glory of God. But really too, it brings a purpose in our suffering. It brings a meaning behind God's omnipresence and his omniscience. And, you know, the concept of knowing and understanding and wisdom and design around our lives. So I don't know, just as you were talking about that, I was thinking about that the concept of when you're talking about demons, and, you know, when you talk about, you know, the definition of what is a demon, and in the way, you know, scripture, as far as the Bible talks about it, it's just fascinating to look at that dynamic of it.
Yeah, no, it's very, very glad you brought up the book of Job, because Job is, I mean, it's a strange story, you know, and it stands out singularly unique, right? You know, and everyone's character is different. God's character is different. The devil's character is different, you know, and you can see because Job wasn't suffering, at least the way the story is told, general suffering. There's general suffering in the world, right? This was aimed at him. Right. And we can see the testament. There's many ways. I mean, so many people have written on this, you know, very intelligently and profoundly. Right. But like you said, it's a fire. It's he's being purified. Right. And his faith is being purified. And so this Satan and Job's unique relationship, that experience that they had together was unique. That's what I was trying to say a little bit. Like, it's not the general suffering in the world that the verse is talking about, although it can be interpreted this way. The world needs God, right? This is about the specific type of suffering that a spiritual aspirant gets, a lover of God gets, the type of suffering that Job alone gets, right? You know, like that, and in the story, you know. Yeah, there's a Vaishnava saint, and he wrote a commentary on a verse, and this verse says that, like, when one surrenders unto the Lord, all one's suffering is destroyed. And I read that and went, great! I want all my suffering to be destroyed. You know, there's first reading across the text, right? And then I read the commentary. It says this happens through the fire of ordeal. Like, you know, like our suffering is destroyed by the suffering, by the fire of ordeal. And then further commentary, he uses this term where he says that there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that when one surrenders unto the Lord, then one is free of all karmas, the results of, one is free of all the results of one's behaviors, you know, of the past, right? But the fact is, people who have surrendered still suffer their karmas. Right, their karma still go, but then he says no, they're free. They're under the direct control. This is devotional attitude, of course. They're no longer under the control of material nature and the laws of material nature. They're now completely surrendered to God. They're under the control of God. But God uses their past activity and their tendencies, right, to correct them, to purify them, to make them chaste servants or pure vessels. I mean, there's something like that. So it's no longer just like the stringent laws of material nature. It becomes the dynamics of the soul embracing or loving or in union with the infinite. When the infinite is put into a finite receptacle, it can hurt. There's going to be some stretching involved, some purification involved, So it's interesting. I think I these verses, to me, very different in style than the book, than the story of Job, but I think it's hinting at the same thing. Job was something very, it's a direct, it was, his suffering was in direct relationship with his love of God, right? And it takes it to a whole nother level. Of course, Young wrote a whole book on commentary on the book of Job that's quite bewilderingly profound. If you're interested, you can probably find it online. I forget what it's called, but maybe it's called Job or something like that. But it's sure. But he wrote quite a bit because he found the story. Oh, there it is. What is it? What's it called, Swamiji?
Answer to Job.
Answer to Job.
Thank you. It's quite challenging. Jai Ma. Any other questions?
And then to comment and to quote Swami Shivananda, because I feel like it's directly, and I quoted this recently, but I'll quote it again. "Oh man, do not be discouraged when sorrows, difficulties, and tribulations manifest in the daily battle of life. Do not murmur, do not grumble. Learn to be wise. Mysterious are his ways. Understand him. The pain you get is his blessing in disguise. Pain is the best teacher in the world. In this world, pain corrects, educates, and disciplines the soul. It infuses mercy in the heart. It develops the power of endurance and patience. It develops willpower. It makes the proud man humble. It purifies the heart. Just as iron is being shaped in the anvil by beating, so man's character is molded by blows, knocks, and pain. Just as impure gold turns to be pure by melting in the crucible several times, so man becomes pure by being burnt in the furnace of pain."
So we should. Sorry, go ahead.
Which also is very similar to some verses in James, which I love, which I will also quote. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith, to no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. He's a double-minded mind unstable in all his ways. Let the lowly brother boast in his exaltation, and the rich in his humiliation, because like the flower of the grass, he will pass away. For the sun rises with its scorching heat and withers the grass, its flower falls, and its beauty perishes. So also will the rich man fade away in the midst of his pursuits. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him."
So one thing we have to, the beautiful, I'm very familiar with that quote by Swami Shivananda. We have a recording of his voice saying it also. He recorded it before he died. Much of that section. So I can hear when you're reading, I heard his voice in cadence. A very interesting, do not grumble, and he has a very.
So I read it like he says it.
He has a very nice,
that's good.
Very nice cadence to it, right? And he's also in general, that suffering makes a proud man humble. Suffering also smashes humble people, right? So we have to be careful not to overly glorify, and that these verses, Swami Shiva, I know because I'm very familiar with his books, right, as well as these verses from the verse we're dealing with, is about specifically the suffering of the way a spiritual aspirant, not only their suffering, but the way a spiritual aspirant views their own suffering, right? And we have to be careful not to then turn that to view other people's suffering the same way, right? Because sometimes it can become, there's 1,000 pitfalls in that, and when we use that language, right? But it is a view of certain ways of spiritual understanding to see our own suffering and to see, because when you're getting the Lord is Ma is the wish fulfilling tree. Going underneath that tree, we're going to be changed, right? And so it's about that relationship with the one that we're after. The closer you get, your attitudes will change, views will change, perspectives will change. And perspective at the top of the mountain is not going to be the same in a different city, right? It's like, and the rules and the carefulness and the mental discipline of every, it's like I have my Guru Bhai Swami, revered Swami Paramananda. He was one of the reasons he moved as his eyes have gone bad and things like that from his mountain ashram in Colorado, right, to India like that, because one time he went hiking somewhere, and because of his eyes like that, he left a tool behind, like a pick, and he says, if this was a different type of hike, this would be my death. Right, you can't make that mistake at that height where he's a mountaineer like that. And he realized, I can't make those mistakes anymore. I won't survive it. So like that. So the rules at a certain level, even the ways we see things, even though somebody else may see those same things and say, you're crazy to think that way. Right. This is we should look at that politically. We can look at that cruel. We can look at that nature and powers. But a devotee, a spiritual aspirant, at different levels, especially the higher levels of their spiritual life, are trained, and this is one of the things that is going to be said in these verses, how to think about things really carefully, how to see suffering, how to see our desire, how to see motivation, how to see relationship. It's going to be very, very, very specific. So I have to be careful to take in these verses and these teachings, right, and not necessarily turn that and say, well, that's why. We see somebody suffering. Oh, why are you suffering? Don't you know the Divine Mother, wish-fulfilling tree, lives in maṇi-dvīpādhivāsinī? That's the proper response. That's why I said we have to know what the subject is, who's being spoken to, and who's the we in this verse? The devas, the gods in the story. Who are the gods? Not the gods. It's us. We're the gods who are searching the Divine Mother. Anyways, Jaimo, leave it there. I got riled up. I like this stuff. But any other comments or questions?
Swamiji, Frank has a question.
Oh, yes, Frank.
Hi. I was wondering if part of suffering could be to engender empathy in us. Like if we see someone who's suffered and we never have, we can offer sympathy, but we can't really offer empathy to them.
Yeah. That's definitely true. And that's and that da idea, right? At different levels, this is at each level, not only what they need to do, but suffering will be interpreted differently in each level too. At the human level, this is where suffering does, and it does give empathy for sure, and compassion and empathy and understanding. But the verse at hand, right, is specifically like, why are you anxious? Why are you suffering? Right, is because she's causing your suffering. Why? So that you can think of, so you can search for her. And where is she? Right here, right now, right? And so that, and then the next series of disciplines in the next verses will all be, and I love these things because then we get to talk about all kinds of different spiritual practices and goddess-centered yogic practices. Will be different mental techniques and spiritual techniques to make God the center, bring God into the focus, develop our devotion, our surrender, our dependence, our meditation, our worship, praise of God, of the Divine Mother. So it's I have next week we can talk more, because the next verse talks more about suffering, right, and why we're suffering. So we can bring in a little bit more of the Theodicy idea and the different reasons why suffering would be a reasonable thing to have a loving God allow, right? But it is still important that the Theodicy is not just a universal theodicy, but a sadhak's theodicy, a devotee's theodicy, right? Why does an all-loving God who allowing me to suffer, not suffering in general? I think is the word. We have to go from the big picture to
Personal.
Personal, but also
to macrocosm.
To like the deepest levels of our psychology, right? This is going to be, that's going to be almost that, right? Because it's at the deepest level of psychology, because where God is right here, right now, right? It's the only thing. She's the only thing, the only one. She's playing all the parts. Who's suffering? It's her, right? On top of that, she's playing all the part. But because she's the only thing and the most obvious thing, we don't see her, right? You have to think. So how to make somebody see something they don't see? That's hard because there's nothing you can do to make somebody, you just have to see it, right? Right. The example, even she gives the example in later in these verses of the rope and the snake idea, right? You see a coiled rope and you think it's a snake. How do you see? The snake doesn't disappear until you see a rope. How to make somebody see a rope when they see a snake? At a certain moment, they just see it. But there are things we can do. Look at it. Look how it's tiled. Does it look like a rope? Wouldn't a rope look like that? You can compare, it hasn't moved in a while, let's go over and poke it. We can do different things to try to, there are techniques for it, right? But ultimately it's like from one moment to another, you see it, right? And then you can't unsee it, right? But the weird thing is you can unsee it. That's one of the problems, and that's the gods see, the gods here representing us, the devotees see, we get moments. I'm sure all of it, none of us would be gathered here unless you've had moments where you've seen her or experienced her in some way, right? But the reason you're here is because it wasn't fully satisfying. It even causes more suffering sometimes, right? There's a story of Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva Maharaj, right, he was a child saint. He wasn't a saint. He was a bratty child of a king who was the son of a second wife. Not the one who'd inherit the throne. And he was told, sorry, you won't inherit the throne. You don't have the right to sit on your father's lap. He said, I will inherit the throne. I will sit on my father's lap. The story goes. And he went off at 5 years old and did austerity, right? And then the sage Narada shows up and tries to convince him a child should be plain, go back. No, I shall. He had such firm, right? So then Lord Narayana, Narada gave him a mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya. He said, Om Namo Narayana, Namo Narayana. After some time, he saw it worked. He saw him. He saw the beautiful form of Vishnu, his Lord, for a second, and then it was gone, right? And then he heard the disembodied voice, which is always the inner voice, right? He says, in this body, never again you'll see me, right? But you're longing to see me because I gave you a taste of what I'm like, right? Will so purify you. At the time of death, you'll be completely pure and you'll see me perfectly, right? So sometimes even a glimpse, a divine glimpse, some experience, or it could be a great experience, or even a faint fragrance of the divinity, anyways, how to make the obvious known and how to keep the known, right? Because I know I tell the story. I didn't the last couple of days. I haven't done it because it's cold and I'm lazy, right? But we walk around the block, right? There'd also do construction, right? But there's one point where I remember one time that snake. We have snakes, so we're conscious of snakes. You're looking for snakes, you see snakes. I saw a snake, and I realized it's like a squished piece of rope, right? I go, there's a like that, and I know it's there. And every time I pass by, I think, there's a snake. Because it looks like a snake. And even I'm looking for it. I'm looking for the thing that looks like a snake, right? It's not that either. This world looks like a world, but it's Ma. We look like people, but we're Ma. You look like you, but you're Ma, right? She's the one being shining through all eyes, hearing through, but what does that mean? Who knows? It's not an easy, we can understand it, kind of. I can say it and be mushy and inspirational, right? But to know it is not an easy thing, right? So this is what this text is getting us to know our essential nature and her essential nature, and to know that those at some level, this is primarily an Advaitic text, are going to be one and the same. So it's a torturous ride to get there. That's sweet. Any other comment?
Guruji?
Yes, somebody.
I was wondering, it would be appropriate to, at the end, read that poem of Swamiji's.
Yes, for sure.
But are there other questions?
Let's see if any other questions. And then...
I was just going to add in one more thing, because this popped up earlier and I couldn't think of what the verse was, so I was looking it up. But this was, I believe, this this was Paul as well. But it says, I'm not saying this because I am need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. And I just think it kind of comes down to like whatever the circumstances you're facing, whether it's specifically connected to your faith and it's part of your refining journey that's being assigned to you by God, like Job, so to speak, or whether it's part of just the nature of being on earth and the suffering that comes with that. And but there is a secret to being content, and it's funny because it feels like it's also about attachment, you know, but also as much as it's releasing attachment, it's almost a dichotomy, because it's at the same time as you're releasing, it also calls you to dive deeper, you know, to like lean into suffering for growth. And and I don't know if that's just circling back again to the refiner's fire, you know, and being content where you're at in your journey and understanding that, you know, all things that essentially that are entrusted to us, whether it comes through a real spiritual refinement that's a trying period, or whether it's through the nature of living on earth, like, you know, just kind of trusting that journey and keeping open hands with it, you know, keeping in that state of release.
Yeah. Beautiful. Swamiji, you can.
So this poem was found in Swami Vivekananda's journal after he passed. It was handwritten on a piece of paper in his journal. And so it is attributed to him, and the Ramakrishna Mission publishers have published it as part of his writings in the complete works. But it's a short poem, and it kind of touches on some of the things we've been talking about, I thought. It's called The Cup. This is your cup, the cup assigned to you from the beginning. Nay, my child, I know how much of that dark drink is your own brew of fault and passion ages long ago. In the deep years of yesterday, I know. This is your road, a painful road and drear. I made the stones that never give you rest. I set your friend in pleasant ways and clear, and he shall come like you unto my breast. But you, my child, must travel here. This is your task. It has no joy nor grace, but it is not meant for any other hand. And in my universe hath measured place. Take it. I do not bid you understand. I bid you close your eyes to see my face.
What a line! Close your eyes to see my face. We can post that on the classroom page. I have not seen this poem. Swami just shared it to me just before we came. As we were discussing these things, you know, he said, "Oh, there's one poem of Swami Vivekananda that reminds me." Very, very, very moving. So thank you for your kind attention. It is now, oh my goodness, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Our hour class is now 2 hours. Anyways,
11 o'clock for some of you.
Oh yeah.
Or 12.
Hi, Mama.
Well, you know, it's like time flies when you're having fun. So this is what a beautiful way to spend our time, you know. And this is actually one of the teachings of the text, of all texts, is that thought of God. One of the best ways to purify the mind and heart is to think of God, right? And this is satsang. It's to think of God and to share. In the Gita, there's a verse that says that. Chapter, you can look it up if you're interested. There is in chapter 10, verse 9, 10, and 11. They call these the nutshell verses, right? And it will tell you, if you want to know what you need to do and what God will do for you. Swami Chaitananda's words, right? And the one that says, the thoughts of my devotees dwell in me, right? Machita, chakata, I think is right? Yes, machita. I know the verses, I just won't, I don't want to mess them up. The thoughts of my devotees dwell in me. right? They derive great happiness in talking about me and in illuminating each other about my glories, talking about me with other devotees, right? To such a person who becomes satisfied, they become satisfied and happy. That to such a person, that's what we need to do: put our mind and thoughts on God, on His stories, and enlighten and share with each other, and then I will Buddhi Yoga. I will connect their minds to their intelligence to me, all right? And then deepam from within their heart, with the flaming torch of knowledge, I shall illuminate their mind, right? So by thinking of God, talking about God, we become tushtati, we become satisfied and blissful, happy, right? God will connect our minds to with Him, with her, and illuminate us from within. I remember one scene years ago, one devotee was one not a very tactful preacher, street preacher, came to the Hare Krishna temple, and he wanted to have a conversation with one of the priests who now he's passed away from a car accident, unfortunately, Muhammad Surana Das. And he began to say, okay, you can, and so he was preaching a very angry way, obviously to the false religion. And he was getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and quoting, quote after quote, getting angrier and angrier, right? And then he said, are you going to say anything? Are you just going to sit there, right? And my friend opened this verse and recited this verse. The thoughts of my devotees dwell in me, and when by talking about me, they become happy and satisfied. Right? He says, you're showing the wrong symptoms. Right, you should becoming. You see, when devotees get together, they become happy and talking about God. Right, Sri Ramakrishna said, one hemp smoker loves to be in the company of another hemp smoker. Right, it's like they recognize another hemp smoker. Right, there's signs. Because and what do they talk about? What do you think they talk about? It's like people like to talk about what they love. And if you love God and you love the scriptures and you love the things, what could be more exciting? So the point is, we're an hour late. That's why, and I think that's why. I mean, I hope. I mean, you're also getting some tushta and ramanti, some joy and satisfaction. I keep talking because I find great joy and satisfaction in these topics. And I know that this is my sadhana. This hearing and talking about the divine is a major part of our spiritual practice. This is our sadhana as well, our seva and our sadhana. All right, Jai Ma, good night, everyone. Happy Navaratri.
Good night.
God blessing.
May I read?
It's getting too late. I think it's too late.
It's okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Jai Ma. Om.